Hi, everybody. My name is Evan Shapiro, and I am your host here at Streaming Media Connect 2023, the virtual conference. Welcome to Streaming Media Connect next panel, A View from the Edge, the state of the cloud Edge CDN integration. Before we get into that, some brief housekeeping notes. First of all, every panel, we give away a $50 Amazon gift card to the person who first correctly answers in the chat the name of the song and the name of the band that was just playing during the intro. You have to be here to win it. So put it in, and even if you're not first, you might be the person left at the end. Hopefully everyone will stay because this is going to be a riveting panel, but you have to be in it to win it. You have to be here to win it. $50 gift card to the first person who can put in the chat the name of the song and the name of the band. Now, keep the chat in the chat. At the end, Mark is going to open up the panel to Q&A from the audience. So please put your questions in the Q&A and leave your chat, your comments, your guesses for the song and the band in the chat. Just a reminder that all the sessions from all 3 days of Streaming Media Connect will be on Streaming Media's YouTube channel next week. The link is in the chat. And with that, I want to bring on our host for A View from the Edge, the state of cloud Edge CDN integration, Mark de Jong from the CDN Alliance. Mark?
Thank you. Perfectly last name, de Jong, in the right way. Thanks for that. Yeah, perfect. For the ones that do not know me, I'm Mark de Jong, chairman of the CDN Alliance, a non-profit organization for the CDN industry. I'm also owner of Excello, a boutique consulting firm in relation to streaming media, video tech, and content delivery, obviously. And I'm also program chair and host for the Content Delivery Summit, which is also organized by Stream Media once or twice a year. But of course, it's not about me. This is about my speakers, my panelists. Bob Collins, Executive Director of Software Development at Starz. Welcome. And Subhrendu Sarkar, Senior Engineering Manager at HBO. Welcome, guys. It's good to have you specifically as content providers into this session. Talk about Edge, talk about CDN, talk about cloud, and all the integrations in between. Just to give the audience a little bit more background and context, can you tell a little bit about your organization and what you actually do within your organization? Subhrendu, can I start with you?
Yeah, sure. So I am with Warner Brothers Discovery. HBO Max got merged with Discovery, and now we are called Warner Brothers Discovery. So overall, I lead the video platform team, which covers Max, the new product that we launched, successor of HBO Max, the D+ products, and a bunch of our other products like Moderator, ATVE, etc., etc. So I lead the video platform from the playback side, the DRM services, the CDN services, and so forth. So entirely on the entire media delivery platform, I manage and lead those teams.
Perfect. Thank you, Subhrendu. Well, Starz might not be as well known as HBO, at least from a branding perspective, maybe. However, you guys have an impressive track record. Can you tell a little bit more about Starz and what you do within Starz?
Sure. Starz started as a premium cable channel about 1994, so we've been around for a long time. One of the founders was very interested in the streaming space, and as a consequence, Starz really got into things fairly early. I mean, long before I got there, there was some things back in 2004 with real networks. There was a service called Vongo back in 2006 that was, it was kind of like Windows Media Center Flash kind of thing. But around 2012, we went into kind of a TV everywhere offering, and that was when streaming got like you'd recognize it now and so forth. Then in about 2016 is when I came on. That was really the strong launch of the direct-to-consumer business. There's still quite a bit of the linear customers, but our streaming is now has more revenue, et cetera, is growing more, et cetera. And I came on, I have a software development background, and I came on because of my experience with applications at scale, and wrote some of the applications. I came in as a consultant, stuck around, I liked it. So now I manage a number of teams, both for delivery, direct-to-consumer streaming, packaging, et cetera. As far as Starz, we're probably around, I think the last accounting was maybe about 17 million subscribers, and we're in South America, Europe, etc.
Perfect, good. Thanks for the insights. So let's first just move into the first question. We have cloud, we have CDN, we have Edge. They all play different roles. They interact with each other. They overlap in some degrees. All in relation to processing, storage, delivery, and it's getting more and more gray on what needs to be where. What's your view on the differences specifically in terms of cloud versus CDN versus Edge, or as far as you can differentiate them, and how do you use that currently? Can I start with you, Subhrendu?
Yeah, sure. So I think cloud, Edge, and CDN. So currently we use cloud and CDN very extensively. We have done some use of the Edge more as an experiment, and then we went back and forth on actually using it or not using it. But primarily cloud and CDN is the current driver. I think going forward, we'll probably move more into the Edge as Edge becomes more capable, more feature rich, and being able to support a lot of other things. Currently, to give you a brief idea how we use the cloud and the CDN, for example, the cloud is specifically used to host all our backend services. I mean, that's pretty much how anyone probably uses it. And the CDN is mainly used for all our content delivery purposes, both from delivering the manifest, delivering the media segments, and also images and stuff like that. So any high volume and high payloads are generally delivered through the CDN because they are both closer to the edge and closer to the customer, and also much more pops and much more availability overall, so reduces latency and so forth. So some of the places where we have kind of experimented and looked into the edge is, I would say, in terms of our manifest delivery, we do a very specific kind of the HLS and DAS manifest that we deliver to the clients and the players are custom based on the platform that they request from, and also based on the user profile, their entitlements. So you need to customize those manifests. I'll give you a simple example. So for example, a very specific Game of Thrones season may have, like, say, 30 subtitles available. And at times we may not want to deliver all 30 subtitles, both based on the profile of the platform, because they may not have enough memory and so forth, and also in terms of what rights we have in a specific region, in a specific territory, to deliver those subtitles. So for example, we may not have rights for, I'm just making this up, but may not have rights for German in Norway, for example. Then we'll not deliver German subtitles for when the request comes for Norway. So we need to customize those manifests, and those manifest customization was something we have tried and played around with doing it on the edge. And that is an area where probably there is more scope to do more things on the edge, and similar stuff we can get into more in the next few questions as well, or in the following discussion.
But basically what you're saying is basically currently it's still cloud and CDN as the main drivers. Cloud on processing storage, CDN on the delivery area. Is this the same with you, Rob, if we look at what you're doing on Starz?
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap there, and I am going to see if I can share one slide, and that will be the tech portion of my presentation. So hopefully we can get through this. And this actually echoes some of the stuff we were talking about earlier, where there's quite a bit more usage within Starz of cloud services. That's really the backbone of the development we do and the application services, etc. And one thing that I will call out for reference is that Starz has a extremely robust group of client developers. We have different teams, that will handle some of these things like Android, iOS, web, 10-foot, Xbox, etc. And in general, we consolidate the services out of the cloud. We have quite a bit of client development, and then the delivery is where the CDNs really come in. The manifests, audio, video captions, etc. And some of this has been built up just by the fact that Starz has been in the streaming space for a while. Some of the choices we made were the best ones at the time. There's, as the market has matured, there's been other things, so we can get into a little bit more detail on that. But as far as where edge services live, the way I tend to think about that is things that are, again, individualized, resident out on your edge nodes, etc., versus the kind of meat and potatoes we have out here in centralized services.
Okay.
So if I'm able to stop sharing, I will do so, and we'll get past the technical part of the presentation.
Exactly. If you then look a little bit ahead, because again, primarily it's cloud, it's CDN as a baseline. Everybody is looking, okay, Edge is going to likely be used more and more short, mid, and long term. What are typical services? So manifest is one. Manifest generation is one element where you see a first move in that direction. What are other typical elements where you think, okay, these are relevant in the short midterm that we might be looking at to bring more to the edge? Rob?
So, some of the things that are informed by Starz Setup are that we, some of the use cases you hear about, like live streaming or ads and so forth. Starz doesn't really do some of those. So some of the use cases that are being touted don't necessarily apply to us, but we found some other places that it has fitted out, sort of a bridge between those client developers we have and getting some individualization in there. So things like making choices that the clients aren't aware of. We can get into that a little deeper, but that's kind of where we're finding the sweet spot for Starz.
So individualization, personalization, whether this is manifest or whether this is content related specifically, does not really matter, or data related.
Yeah. Probably the best use case we've had that we've had the most success with is with that setup that I showed you. The clients have individual teams working on their individual platforms. So that has a lot of benefits in the sense that they can they can take advantage of platform specific services and that kind of thing, design things that are specific to the platforms. Where it becomes a little cumbersome sometimes is when we need those clients to, we have one feature that we want to roll out from the services aspect. And then the clients will have to do quite a bit of, a lot of development to implement it, since you're implementing it X number of times for your clients. In the past, that's just kind of been it. I mean, there's always plenty of those kind of things. What we found for Edge is we said, we're going to be doing some A/B testing, and we want to control it from the server. How about we put that kind of logic out there on the edge, and have some logic to say, okay, this client is coming in, we want to give them these images, we want to give them these, this kind of landing page experience, and compare it to somebody else who's randomly been picked up and so forth. So, as we started out down that road of saying, let's implement this on the server and let's have the clients work on that, we said, it kind of got put in the backlog, and we were looking at the timelines and said, what if we can put that logic on the edge? Everything's on the server. The clients are completely agnostic of what's going on, and that's turned out to be a good use case for us.
Cool. Subhrendu?
So I think let me try to answer your question in putting them in like two categories. So I look at the edge as being beneficial in two categories. One is trying to do user-specific customization or session-specific customization, that things that we need to do. And then there is client or platform-specific customization that we may need to do. So now going deeper into the user-specific ones or session-specific ones, I think manifest manipulation, ad insertions are typically the top use cases there. So both of them are very valid areas to explore to doing it on the edge. Something that actually I did at Crunchyroll in my previous company. We did similarly with ad insertion from the edge as well. So those are areas that can be explored, and it also depends a lot on the availability of the edge in what form. So just to form an example, what is an edge? What does the edge really mean? It is an edge which is different from, say, the cloud. So for example, AWS, I'm not picking out AWS in general, but AWS regions and AWS lambdas may not necessarily, or lambda at edge may not necessarily being it's on the edge. They may actually be running on the AWS regions. So those are some critical things you need to look deep into to basically seeing, okay, do I use AWS Lambda Edge just because it says it's an edge, or do you really look into the hood and see, oh, it's called AWS Lambda at Edge, but it actually is running in the AWS regions only. So it's effectively the same as running in a region, right? So, but the use case of running dynamic ad insertion services and customization of manifest and delivery of those on the edge makes a lot of sense. Other places where edge can potentially benefit is anywhere where you have high traffic or high load of traffic requests, where edge can spread out or distribute the load a lot. And that's where I think it is very similarities with the CDN. And that's why many of the CDNs have actually been coming out with edge functionalities. Yes. So it's kind of like overlapping of each other. But in that context, there are a couple of things that could be beneficial. One is saying maybe we can do authentication on the edge before it starts hitting the cloud services. Then there are platform-specific customizations or rules that, so for example, I'll give you, on our platform, we have a services-based system where we have those rules put in to specify which platform gets what kind of features, what kind of manifest, what kind of, say, a particular device doesn't have capability to play 60 FPS. So we have those rules implemented on the services side, and we apply those rules when the requests come in. So those rule-based engines could be deployed on the edge and be much more beneficial in applying those rules, for example. Other things like DRM services, which can be very high volume if we are giving out like very short licenses. those can be exported to the web. Other things like, and along with DRM services, another area of where Edge can really be beneficial is in terms of fraud detection on the edge, or using the DRM services and detecting fraud on the edge. Also because it helps in, you don't need to, like, if you have a central processing, then you get all your requests from, like, say 10 million requests or whatever the number is, and you need to process huge chunks of data, and it basically slows down. If you distribute along the edge, you are actually processing less, and it will be faster, and detection will be faster, and your mechanism to either downgrade, revoke will be faster. And similarly, along the same lines, possibility to do CDN log analysis on the edge is another aspect which ties to both fraud detection as well as doing CDN switching on the edge, along with the CDN log analysis, are all potential areas to doing on the edge. And that's where I'm most excited with the edge in general.
Capabilities. So basically, from your point of view, basically there are two types, let's say, of edge functions. One is related to actual users or sessions, and the other one is service related. And those are the two categories basically that you the most benefits in. I think that's also very interesting for the audience itself to understand where do you place them and what are the ones. Okay, good, perfect. Now let's zoom into the different, let's say, the three different parts of the ecosystem: cloud, CDN, and edge. Cloud, as mentioned, is primarily used for all the processing part beforehand. But if you look at the CDN, the connection with the CDN, because eventually CDNs are connected to the cloud and getting the content from, etc., etc. The cloud function is origin shield, storage. Those elements are typically all done in the cloud or related to the cloud in general. How do you look at this in combination? Because the next step in the integration there is the CDN part. What are things that you are really careful about in the integration between CDNs and clouds in that regard? Rob, can I give that to you first?
Yeah, for sure. To your point, there's cloud is really the heavy lifting in all the processing. From ingest, we get to partner deliveries, through the storage to processing to packaging, encryption. That's all done in the cloud. As far as how it gets delivered to CDNs, I mean, when we'll once things are ready to go, like your video, audio, etc., those files are transferred to origin storage at our primary CDN, and we have an entire cloud engineering department that is, takes care of the security, authentication, like keeping uptime, scaling, etc. So that's a expertise that's been built up over the years, and the primary workflow is things happening in the cloud and then being delivered just for consumption as on the CDN. And then from the origin storage, we will, we work with a number of CDN vendors, so it will propagate out from there.
Okay, so you use one CDN or origin storage of one CDN as a baseline, use that CDN probably as for delivery as well, but then you also add other CDNs that are pulling from that particular CDN. So you have the scale and capability of that CDN. You don't have to have an origin on the cloud. Correct.
And there's, it's kind of a interesting thing we do each time we sign up, right? Because we are kind of go to market with CDNs is we use a number of them, and we've kind of our use case is well within the CDN the wheelhouse, as in we will use a lot of ABR technologies, but they're all pretty good at that. Some of the differentiators where you see with like the ad insertion again isn't a feature we use. So we will work with a lot of CDNs, and they all do have their origin storage that we can, we'll do some cost analysis, say, do we deliver to, if we're using 3D CDNs, do we deliver to origin storage at the various ones, or do we pay for egress to do that?
Traffic.
Yeah.
Okay. Subhrendu, how is that done on your end? Is it similar, or is there a different setup you guys use for CDN versus cloud as part of that?
It's very similar to what Rob mentioned. I'll probably try to highlight the small differences. So we also use a multi-CDN setup, or multiple CDN partners we use. And we have gone back and forth between using a CDN as an origin towards directly configuring the CDNs to fetch from the origins, or storage origins, so to speak. And both have their pros and cons, I would say. So, for example, I think cost-wise, it may be slightly beneficial to use a CDN as an origin, or an existing CDN as an origin, as an origin sealed or something like that. However, the flip side is you essentially create a single point of failure, because if that CDN is down for any period of time, then all your CDNs will experience some kind of problem, unless some kind of problem for the content that is not cached already on those CDNs. So that's one pros and cons. So, and I can't say categorically which one is better, but
There's no magic. There's no magic formula.
Yeah, there's no magic formula that this is better and this is not. It's basically you have to analyze what is more important for you at what point. But also, I think a lot of us probably always think that a CDN is very highly available, it will never go down, but honestly, it does go down. It will not go down every so often, but it will go down once in a year or 2 years, but it does happen. It's not something that it never ever happens. So it does happen as well. The other part is so on Max and HBO Max previously, we had some very high profile content like Game of Thrones, House of Dragons. So in those kind of scenarios, we would generally pre-warm our CDNs as well before, say, the 9 p.m. on a Sunday. We'd go ahead and pre-warm the CDNs. Otherwise, the thundering herd that occurs at 9 p.m. is going to basically bring down either the origin or the CDNs themselves. So that's another measure we do to make sure and work with our CDN partners. Different CDN partners have different mechanisms to pre-warm, so we have to work through those, how to do those. And the third element is how internally we manage the CDN switching or the CDN distribution. So there are two aspects to that, which is once you have a multi-CDN setup, you need to make sure how you distribute your traffic along the 3 CDNs, and there are many dimensions to that problem. One dimension is your region, which region. Another dimension is your cost. So each CDN will have different cost structure, different pricing, and your contracts will be different. Contracts, I mean, you will have a contract saying you want to hit this much petabytes or this much gigabytes of delivery. So if you hit this is the rate you get. So based on those, you have to optimize your distribution. Another part is your QoE for each CDN, how you get the QoE across each CDN in each region. So for example, CDN A may be very good in region X, but CDN A may not be that good in region Y, for example, and you need to balance that out. So QoE is another metric that you need to pay attention to. And then the CDN switch, and then the part I was missing is different kinds of streams. So for example, I mean, there are two mainly, or three, you can say three. One is VOD streams, one is AVOD streams, or advertisement enabled streams, and the third is live streams. So based on the three, you can also need to make sure to evaluate, analyze your CDNs to make sure how you distribute your traffic between the 3 CDNs. So circling back, we at Warner Brothers Discovery, we have mechanisms to play around with those dimensions and distribute the traffic between our multiple CDNs. And we are constantly trying to improve those as well based on all those dimensions as well.
I mean, if you just hear all this, it's pretty complex. That's for sure.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things I would amplify what Subhrendu said, in that your the way you stream will inform all those kind of strategies. I mean, in our case, since we are video on demand only, there's we can we have a SLA of when we're going to get our content out there into our origin storage. It's generally at least a couple days ahead of time, and so our risk is relatively low for that propagation, in the sense that if it's absolutely CDNs go down, and from the playback perspective, we always have failover and that kind of thing. But as from propagating from origin storage, if our primary CDN that we use for that was down for a week, that would probably signal the end of the world versus a small outage that they generally have. But when we get down to CDNs from client playback, then we have a system where the clients will be presented saying, here is your primary CDN, get your stuff from here. Here's a backup CDN, a different vendor. Whatever reason you have, if you want to switch, do it. There's the kind of this is almost like edge-like behavior, but not but it's more like a client development saying, the network latency, how your connectivity and so forth. So here's what we're recommending you use, but if you want to fall back to this. So those are the kind of things that are that we take into account, and also what Subhrendu was saying about the decision which CDN to point to. A lot of times will depend on the commit that we have, that vendor A said we're going to give you X amount of traffic, so we're always kind of looking to make sure that we keep in line with those. And again, that's kind of a cost and reliability equation.
Okay, cool. So I mean, it's clear you both use MultiCDN, and I think for now it's like 60-65% of all the bigger kind of providers actually already are using MultiCDN by default. What kind of is this self-developed? Are you using any third parties? Is this based? Do you do this purely client side? Is this something server side? Is it a combination of the two? Maybe give a little more highlight. And how many CDNs are you using? Because some say, yeah, you need to have 9 CDNs. Others say, well, 2 is enough. Have various different experiences on this. So what's your take on this, Rob?
So this is as far as the first question is, how do we, what do we use to change out CDNs and so forth? What I just described of the client saying, I'm not going to use A, I'm going to use B. That is homegrown. That kind of hits on something that I alluded to of saying, Starz has been streaming for a long time. There are some really great things that, that's one of the ones we're looking at, of saying, having that the CDN switching. I think our homegrown stuff does a good job with it, but there's also some things. I mean, we're in a situation now where we've got working systems. So our decision is not like, hey, let's look at what's out there. It's more like,
it's not a buy or build. It's not a buy or build strategy anymore.
Yeah,
right?
It's like, is the stuff out? Yeah. Yep. Is the stuff out there better that doesn't justify not only itself but replacing what we've got? So there's again, that's generally homegrown. And then the second part of your question is one I don't remember.
Whether how you do it is more client side, server side, a combination of the two, and what kind of number of CDNs that we're looking at.
Yep. Definitely client side. Oh yeah, and you'd asked about the number of CDNs we use. We are currently using 3. That seems to be about the right number. We've experimented with more than that. I think again, it kind of goes back to our use case is pretty straightforward. We do, for all intents and purposes, we do nothing live. and it's all video on demand. So we are able to go to pretty much any of the CDN vendors. We've worked with most of them and say, here's what we've got planned for the next year. What's what kind of prices can you have? What kind of services, etc. And from those three, we will route traffic and allow the clients to switch.
Good. Subhrendu?
So I'll start off with I think the easy answer for how many CDNs we use. I think if I remember correctly, is 4. But we keep on, at times we'll add one, we'll remove one. So that happens all the time.
Constantly.
Sometimes sometimes it may go down to 3 and sometimes it will go down to 5. So, but around that number is 4 to 5 is how I would say. And then again, as I said before, is the number of CDNs also will keep varying based on region and the contracts and that we would have. So, for example, LATAM may have more CDNs, may have less CDNs than US. EMEA or Europe may have different. So all those things can vary a little bit. In terms of how we do CDN switching or how we decide that, we use a combination of both client side and services side today. The client side is more used to doing similar to what Rob was mentioning, is more to doing how, if something is failing, how to do a fallback on or what to fall back on, so that at least the user gets a seamless experience. So that's on the client side. On the services side, we do try to control the distribution of traffic. So we look at the distribution of traffic, look at KOE and those metrics to do from the services side, distribute between the 4 CDNs. The aspects I'm really excited about in the coming future is, I think both HLS and DAS specs are coming out in terms of adding multiple CDNs as part of the manifest spec. So which will be a good enhancement to actually making it very standard, both from the player side as well as end-to-end. And right now our entire stack is homegrown. However, the more it becomes more industry standard, both from the spec side, it becomes easier and easier for everyone to comply to those standards and seamlessly follow those.
Cool. And then I'll move to the third part, which is the edge. I think the edge, how I would interpret the edge is the closest location where content can be served to the end user. Some say, well, the edge is actually the client. That's the closest edge you can get. It depends on how you look at it. Edge, as might know, everybody knows, is offered by cloud providers like Amazon, etc. It's offered by CDNs. They now have edge functions, as mentioned before. There actually are already specific edge providers that only do edge, pure application, and they focus purely on the application part and not so much on the delivery part. And even operators are offering edge capabilities in their networks, so within the ISP networks itself. So there's a variety of different initiatives ongoing in that part. How do you see edge in relation to cloud and CDN? As an extension, as an add-on? Do you more use it on? Do you think it's more usable in relation to cloud? Is it more usable in relation to CDN? Where do you see edge going in, let's say, the next, let's say 1 to 2 years? Where does edge will take off? Rob, can I start with you?
Absolutely. And I'll kind of drill down on the use cases that we've got that I know about. I mean, the one that I mentioned before is our primary, that indisputably an edge kind of deployment, and that is using it for A/B testing, analytics, and so forth. And that one, the main benefit is just kind of acceleration, that I think we're able to make it a server project that does not require specific client development, that that makes it easier, less complicated for us. And since that's been out there, there's been some other sort of similar type of ideas to say, hey, how about we piggyback on that? One that probably our primary one that's more in the experimental phase really involves like recommendation and personalization. That's something we've been doing for a long time, but again, more like homegrown. But at some point, there were enough people doing it that we said, you know, there's let's partner with a bigger kind of AI and recommender system vendor, and they're going to always have more paid cheese than we do. So we went with that, and we've been using that, and it's still kind of server bound in a lot of ways. I mean, there's the processing we do and so forth, which is okay, but there feels like there are some opportunities to say, you know, things that happen in real time, things that choices users make. Sometimes those will take, you know, maybe not long, but maybe a minute to propagate back and inform what kind of personalization somebody's seeing. Out on the edge, we might be able to say, okay, let's now offload some of that stuff we're doing on the server right now. Let's put it closer to the edge, and then get a quicker kind of response. I mean, again, that's still kind of in the early stage of that, but so I don't know if it will ever become a real thing, but we're doing a spike and kind of conceptually we like what it holds.
Subhrendu, what's on your end?
Yeah, so I think piggybacking on what Rob said, I think I would highlight like there are kind of like two categories again. One is primarily on acceleration or latency sensitive features or applications that you can and probably is a very good candidate to run on the edge. And other is where you may have limitations, or you may run into limitations if you run something at scale on the cloud, or where it may make more sense to distribute things on the edge because you will process lesser and hence will be faster. Having said both of those, I think, and I can go into some examples of those. One critical thing for edge is, I think right now, edge is in the beginning stages of the availability and all of that. So one important aspect that edge needs to come to is start making sense cost-wise. If the cost on the edge is significantly higher from the cloud, then it becomes more difficult to rationalize processing things on the edge in large volumes, so to speak. Now, coming back to maybe some examples that you can run on the edge, I think, as Rob said, like recommendations or anything that is user customization, you probably can and be able to use the edge. So recommendation systems, ad insertions, manifest customization, and so forth. DRM services, where you may want to have DRM services tied to specific entitlements of users, so things like that. And the other set of is things like CDN routing, switching decision making, CDN log analysis. And this again comes back to probably tying to the CDN edges or CDN providers who provide edge computing. They may be more suited to provide the CDN logs and processing them. One aspect I am hoping we make progress in the next few years is more standardization on the CDN logs, because right now CDN logs across different partners are all in different ways. So what essentially happens is it becomes very difficult to, like, if I'm writing something, an analysis tool for analysis of a CDN log, I have to write like four different softwares to do on the 4 different CDNs. And then if you add a 5th one, you write a 5th one. And if you remove the 5th one, then you no longer need the 5th one. So you can't justifying that cost to develop something for CDN log analysis becomes harder and harder. But once that becomes more standard, then it would make much better use case to running it on the edge than on a central server, because you wouldn't want to pipe in like petabytes of CDN logs into a central location when it makes more sense to process them, analyze them on the edge, and make decisions based on that on the edge itself, rather than doing centralized decisions, because you probably anyways would need like edge decisions only. Like a edge is tied to a specific region and you need a decision for that region only. So those are pretty much my highest like elements that I would say would be the highlights of the edge coming in the next few years.
Yeah, so basically one of the things I hear is basically creating shorter feedback loops in any way or form. I think is one of the main elements here that we see instead of going back to the cloud and back and forth, the feedback loop just ends at the edge and goes back.
Yeah.
Now let's look at the negative side of edge. It's always positive. Everybody loves the edge, etc. But there are also potentially some downsides on it. Subhrendu, can you define some downsides, or at least concerns, or you bumped your head?
Yeah, I think
like those are things like that needs fixing in the edge space.
I think so the main challenges on the edge is the lack of standardization to begin with right now. So for example, from a deployment perspective, we have AWS Lambda Edge, which supports Lambda functions and things like that, and then others will have something else. And compared to like the cloud, where Kubernetes and things like Kubernetes have become very standard, so extending that to the edge will be very beneficial because it makes things seamless with the cloud, in my opinion, rather than like discovering and building new technologies just specifically for the edge. Because what we are essentially talking about is taking certain cloud functions and moving them to the edge. And it becomes easier if we do not need to build something on a new technology altogether, but do some transformations on existing technologies. So that's the main challenge, I would say. The second challenge is generally the cost, or justifying the cost. If the cost is significantly higher than the cloud, then it becomes harder and harder to justify that, even with the benefits. So I think those are the two main challenges, I would say.
Rob, anything to add? Or
yeah, totally agree with Subhrendu, but there's also just the besides the portability, there's just the fact that you've got folks who are have developed this expertise over years in the cloud, and there's a certain predictability when we say we're going to have an initiative, we're going to deploy it as a cloud service. What exactly is going to happen? There's the whole, there's the folks learning what works on the edge. There's just, kind of the unknown of saying, yes, we understand this use case, but is it going to have the same performance characteristics? Is it going to have the same logging, etc.?
Cool. I'm gonna put in the last question, and then we're gonna open up for any Q&As. Best practices, right? You're basically telling a little bit about how you do things. I think that a lot of people like real life examples and experiences on this. A lot of people are still in the beginning phase of those edge functions or looking at it, etc. So before they start, or maybe they already started, but hey, what's the best practices that you can bring? Okay, these are things that you really need to think about beforehand, before you move into developing stuff for the edge. What will be 1, 2, 3 best practices that you think this is something that you really need to consider? Subhrendu?
So, in my opinion, is when you look at the edge, really evaluate how edge is going to benefit your application, and make sure that you understand that, and then invest in it rather than just jumping onto edge. And that applies to similarly like the multi-CDN conversation. So if you are starting small, do you need multi-CDN? Similarly, if you're starting small, do you need edge at all or not? The second part is edge computing, as I said before, right now is very bifurcated, or different technologies are getting used. So it becomes important to choose either the right edge, or not to choose the edge, but choose to develop something on the cloud and then extend it to the edge on an ongoing basis. So that's how I would say that two best practices are. And I think the thing that what Rob mentioned is the lack of standardization on the edge is challenging, not just from the CI/CD, but also from the log collection and debugging tools and either remote debugging. So all those things can become super expensive, even with the benefits. So those are things that one needs to really evaluate based on the use case, obviously, and then jump into that.
Cool. Very, very interesting. Rob?
Yeah, I would say it's part and parcel of the things we've talked about, and that really make that use case earn it, because there are, there are the use cases that I think of in streaming. There are very good solutions developed from the cloud over the years. If you're going into the maybe less mature sort of things with less portability, possibly more cost, less expertise, really make sure you're getting that benefit and looking at your situation. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that informed the decision we made, was that we went with, as of now, we've only got the edge development on our primary CDN, which also is our primary development cloud. So there's they make it a little easier. I think it's a more daunting proposition of going to different paradigms that are not standardized.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for all the insights. I have two questions. One is really related to this particular topic. The other one is a little bit off, but I think it's interesting for the audience to know. I got a question from Herb Jelinek. And his question is, how do you measure performance so you can compare CDNs and compare edge versus cloud deployments? So this is really, how do you do performance metrics, which I think is an interesting question. CDN is, we have certain performance metrics, but for edge, there's maybe a little bit more complicated. Subhrendu?
Yeah, so I'll start off with the CDN example, and then I'll jump into what we may want to do with the edge. So CDN performance. So one challenge with CDN performance metrics is you can look at the CDN. Each CDN vendor will probably provide its metrics and will provide its logs. So definitely one source of the metrics. But the challenge with that, as I've said before, is they are not standardized across multiple CDNs. So when you start using multiple CDNs, then reading those CDNs in an automated fashion becomes a challenge. And also the other part is CDNs produce petabytes of logs, so piping the logs, processing the logs, that's a lot of software development and considerations that you need to make sure. So one way at Warner Brothers Discovery we have piggybacked on is more piggybacking on the client or the player metrics and using that as a benchmark for the CDN metrics. So for example, our player will report video startup time, rebuffering ratio, tagged for every CDN, and we'll use that to basically benchmark the CDN's performance. So now coming to similarly on the edge, I think as and when somebody needs to look at edge and start developing applications, they would need to also evaluate how they are going to collect those metrics, whether it's a player or client metric that needs to be instrumented and collected and analyzed, or can they rely upon the edge computing metrics itself, which in my opinion will be similarly a challenge as the CDN metrics because they are also not standardized at this point. So I mean, TLDR for me is, I think, focus on whatever metrics you have control of and try to get more of those, and tagging them for specific edge computing servers, regions, put all your dimensions with that, and that way you'll have better control in figuring out how your edge computing servers are performing across each one of those dimensions.
Well,
So I'll say that there was, I'll use the example of the analytics edge service we have out there. There was quite a bit of skepticism that it was going to, that it would be as performant as we want. I mean, we were essentially putting a layer in between a system that had been working for however long, and putting that application in there to do some logic. And so we did quite a bit of load testing from the server side. And it was, the results were good. So we went forward with it. And then we also, as we rolled it out, we kind of did it in a partial way to, again, to, like Subhrendu was saying, on the client side, to make sure that there was not some hidden performance hit out on the edge as we do this. But it's like I said, it's been good so far.
Good. And I mean, we have not touched the whole concept of potentially multi-edge, which I think is a complete new lot of discussion for a complete new panel. But I think everybody understands over time we're going to have multi-edge, and we're going to do performance benchmark between all the different edge functions, etc. Everybody knows this coming. But I think a lot of tools are still in that regard, like Subhrendu said, a lot of tools are still missing in that regard. Still needs to be built up. Good. Then the other question I have here is in relates to open caching. And the question here is, how have the panel found arranging open caching with ISPs? Is it more hassle than it's worth? Now, I'm not familiar with you both using open caching in any way or form. As far as I know, you guys are primarily relying on CDNs and not based on open caching standards from ISPs. Can you give some insights on this, Rob, from your end in terms of open caching?
Unfortunately, I can't. There's my understanding is there was some conversations about it, I think even before I got there, but we don't use it.
You don't use it at all. Okay.
I'm not aware of anybody under my purview, at least.
Okay. Subhrendu?
So I'll try to answer as best as I can. So in terms of Warner Brothers Discovery using open caching, this is something I probably cannot discuss openly. But in general, I try to answer it in general. I think open caching is, in my opinion, so the question was whether it's a hassle or not, right?
Yeah. Is it worth the effort? That's basically the question. Yes.
So again, I think the real answer is it depends on your use case. If your use case is really at scale and at volume, then it is probably worth the hassle. If so, you really need to analyze your use case in terms of what kind of scale and what kind of distribution you are trying to achieve with open caching with the ISPs, and what kind of both latency benefits and cost benefits you will achieve by doing it. So that way, I think if your volume is good enough, if your distribution is wide enough, I think, in my opinion, it is worth the hassle. If your volume is not big enough, if your distribution is not wide enough, then in my opinion, I think CDNs should do a decent enough job, and you probably would not need open caching with the ISPs.
The benefits as part of it. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, you guys have the big experience in terms of implementation. I know there are other kind of providers that are much deeper into open caching, but again, this is another panel. So hopefully that's something for next time. Perfect. Thanks, you guys. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Subhrendu. I'm giving it back to Shapiro to take it back from me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a great panel. Thanks, Mark. Thank you to the panelists. Here we are right now. About to give away yet another $50 gift card, Amazon gift card, for the correct answer to the song in the band. The song in the band were Mickey and the Soul Generation. I'm sorry, that was the band. The song is Give Everybody Some. And the first person to put it in who is still here is Paul Fillion. So Paul, you'll win the gift card. Someone will reach out to you from Streaming Media Connect via email over the next couple of days, and you will get your gift card. If not, you can email me. Thanks everybody for sticking around to the end of the panel, especially Paul. Come back in a half an hour at 2:30 for the next panel, Sports Book Streaming, Micro Betting and Other Factors Driving Low Latency Streaming. That's at 2:30 right here. Remember, all the videos from Streaming Media Connect 2023 will be up at the Streaming Media YouTube page next week. Look for them. The link is in the chat. I will see you in a half an hour for Sports Book Streaming. Thanks.